The heart is not a pump. Part 6. We are now brought to the following question. If the brain is the great electrical reservoir of the physical system and furnishes electricity to it in all its various departments, from whence is it supplied? In answering this important question, we shall take up the philosophy of the circulation of the blood. In discussing this deeply interesting portion of our subject, I must in the first place beg leave to differ somewhat from the learned and standard authors who have written on the circulation. I cannot believe the heart, weighing only about 8 to 10 ounces, can exert a force equal to 25 or 50 tons, as taught by some writers. This is sheer nonsense, and too preposterous to merit a moment's consideration at the bar of reason or candour. Neither do I conceive it to act on the hydraulic or hydrostatic principle, but I do believe we have more rational, common sense, and consistent theory by which to account for its functions, and that is upon electrical principles. And here we take occasion to acknowledge the assistance we have received on this point from Dr. J. B. Dodds, whose views on this subject more fully correspond with our own than those of any other author who writes upon it. We find this universal law prevails in electricity, to wit, two bodies possessing like electrical polarity repel each other, but having an opposite or dissimilar polarity, they attract each other. Now let us bear in mind the fact that this law is universal. The atmosphere which we breathe is composed of two gases, one of which, the oxygen, being electrically positive, and the other, nitrogen, electrically negative. By virtue of this law, they are held together and combined in atmospheric relation. In the act of inspiration, the oxygen is retained or separated by the lungs from the nitrogen and transmitted to the venous or negative blood, while the nitrogen is expelled from the lungs in the condition of carbonic acid gas, it being negative and hence unfit for the purposes of life. The venous blood possessing a negative electrical polarity, and the electricity of the oxygen possessing a positive electrical polarity. Now, then, the law of unlike steps in and unites them, and at the same instant changes the electrical polarity of the venous blood from negative to positive. Also, from venous to arterial blood, from a dark purple hue to a bright cherry colour. The lungs always uniformly in health in a positive electrical condition. Hence, by virtue of the law, likes repel, the blood must, in obedience to the law, be repelled and driven from the positive lungs immediately after being put in the same electrical polarity with them, and it is thus driven, not conveyed merely, as physiologists tell us, but upon electrical principles, repelled from the great magnet, to wit, the lungs, they having the same polarity with itself, and through the pulmonary veins, and here I object to the term veins, as arterial blood is always found in these vessels. Therefore they are arteries and not veins. The newly made arterial blood is driven by the positive lungs to the left auricle of the heart, from thence to the left ventricle of large chamber of the heart. At this point, let us pause and ask, why does the positive arterial blood leave this chamber? Physiologists and anatomists tell us because the muscles of the ventricle contract upon it with the power of 50 or 100,000 pounds, and by this means forces the blood from the chamber. I grant that, were this the case, it would be reason enough for the blood leaving, but I utterly deny the premises as too ridiculous to be believed for a moment. But we think a more rational explanation is, the blood leaves this ventricle upon the same principle and by the same power that it did the lungs a moment previous, to wit, upon the principle that like polarities repel, the lungs being a much larger and stronger positive magnet than the blood, and the blood yet being found within the electrical range or influence of the lungs. Therefore, the blood must either leave or the lungs must, or the law has failed, and hence is not universal and reliable. Now, as none are disposed to doubt the validity and stability of the law, we think they are forced to the conclusion that this, to say the least, is a plausible and common sense explanation. Hence we hold that they are, by the principles of honour, bound to either adopt it or give us a better one. The blood is repelled upon the principles laid down from the left ventricle of the heart into the great aorta, or large artery of the circulating system, and through it and its numerous branches and ramifications is thrown by the same repelling power to all portions of the system. After performing its zigzag journey through the arterial system and accomplishing its design or the purpose of the great master builder in the animal economy, which design will shall soon endeavour to show, it is then received into the capillary vessels, and from thence to the veins, and finally back to the right portions of the heart and lungs. Now, as the blood loses all its positive electricity, which it gained in the lungs, while accomplishing its journey through the arteries, how or by what principle is it returned to the heart and lungs? We answer upon the principle of the universal law, unlikes attract, two bodies having a dissimilar electrical polarity attract. The larger and fixed body always attracting the lesser and movable one. As soon as the blood has entered the vein, its polarity is changed from positive to negative, and therefore the lungs always remaining positive and being the great fixed magnet, hence the venous blood being the lesser movable negative magnet, must be attracted to them, and not they to it. After arriving in its journey as far as the right ventricle of the heart, we ask again, why does it not remain there, inasmuch as the muscular structure of this ventricle is not nearly as powerful as that of the left? We answer most emphatically, because of the strong electrical attraction that the lungs exert upon it, and for no other reason. Now, we promise to show one of the objects, and we think altogether the most important one, of the circulation, that of furnishing and supplying the brain and whole system with the vitalizing element, electricity, which we contend it does in the following manner. In explaining the circulation, you will bear in mind, I told you that the arterial blood in its transmission through the arterial system lost the electricity it gained in the lungs, but did not tell you what became of it, which I will now do. We find on examining the body after death that the great master builder has proved a nerve for each artery, and most skillfully and with the utmost precision placed them in juxtaposition with each other. But not so with the veins. We often find them unaccompanied by a nerve. I ask, Would it not be well for the medical man in his post-mortem examinations to pause at this point and solve the problem? Ask himself the question, why did the Creator make this distinction? Or in other words, so uniformly place a nerve by an artery and not so uniformly by a vein. For you may be assured, however imperfect man's skill and works may be, those of the Almighty are always perfect and right. Do not pass over this lightly and treat it as a small thing and not worthy of your earnest attention. Be assured of this, however small a matter this may be in your estimation, it contained magnitude and majesty enough to engross the skill and wisdom of Deity. And let me say to my brethren in a profession, as some of them are members of this, and I am happy to say of nearly all my classes, that our patrons, the masses, are beginning to inquire for the reason of this, and to them many other strange and mysterious facts. And I contend that they have an undoubted right to ask, yes, and demand of us satisfactory explanations. I rejoice that the time is coming, and now is, when the people are not to be satisfied with light and superficial explanations on these abstruse subjects. Vastly better for the world had they long ere this waked up to this subject. Then true science and knowledge would have been more thoroughly understood and taught. But trusting you will pardon me for this digression, I will pursue the subject. Let us bear in mind the fact that the nerve is expressly designed and arranged for the transmission of the nervo-vital fluid, or electricity. Now, do you not perceive that where there is a nerve, there is prima facie evidence of the existence of electricity near it? Now then, as the arterial blood contains this element and is constantly giving off in its passage through the artery, therefore we see the absolute necessity of a proper conductor to receive it, and as the venous blood has no electricity to impart, hence there is no such necessity for an electrical conductor or nerves to accompany it. The nerves which accompany the arteries are involuntary, that is to say, not under the control of the will, and have their origin in the cerebellum or involuntary portion of the brain. The electricity that is being given off by the arterial blood in its passage through the artery is taken up by induction on these nerves and conveyed to the cerebellum or small brain, that standing in a negative electrical relation to these nerves, but in a positive relation to the cerebrum or large brain, also to all the viscera organs of the body. I wish you now to distinctly understand and remember another universal law of electric action. When you close a circuit of electricity upon any object, the current uniformly passes in one direction, from the positive to the negative electrode. Hence the positive gives off and the negative receives the current. Do not forget this principle. The electricity thus received by the cerebellum is a portion of it sent to the cerebrum, and from thence to be distributed or appropriated by the great monarch on his throne, or the voluntary mind, to the minutest portions of his realm. In other words, for the purpose of carrying on the functions of animal life and voluntary motion, another portion of which is retained by the cerebellum and appropriated to the various organs of the body for the purpose of enabling them to perform their functions. Hence we see the manner in which the great fountain or brain is supplied with electricity, and also the very important relation the lungs hold in the animal economy, that of connecting man with the external world. We will now briefly call your attention to the cause of disease and its philosophy. Medical men generally suppose that there are many causes for the various diseases in existence, and that one disease may have various causes in nature to produce it. But we contend that there is but one grand cause for all disease, and this is a loss of balance of the two forces of electricity in the part or parts diseased. And as this is the cause of all convulsions and operations in nature, the same is true of the human system, where disease always begins in the finest, invisible, and ends in the grossest parts. I hope you enjoyed this reading. Think about it. Is the heart a pump? Is it really the cause of the circulation of the blood? Or is this an electrical principle? And is the lungs the pump, the heart the valve, the great regulator of the blood? It's very interesting to think about. Very interesting. And I hope this video has been interesting to you. Think about it. Has the scientists and the medical profession been wrong for 400 years? I think so. How about you? Take care, everyone. Have a lovely day. Keep on studying, keep on researching, keep on finding the truth, and may it be of great benefit to you and the rest of the world. Take care.